Lord sent a word unto Jacob, and it hath lighted on Israel, and all the people shall know, even Ephraim and the inhabitant of Samaria, that say in the pride and stoutness of heart, the bricks are fallen down, but we will build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will change them to cedars. Therefore the Lord shall set up the adversaries of Rezin against him, and join his enemies together, the Syrians before and the Philistines behind. They shall devour Israel with open mouth.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing the Gospel of Luke. We're near the end here. Yesterday we covered verse 27, in which as the Lord Jesus had, beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Well, but we saw how in an hour you could quickly spend a lot of time in the Old Testament and yet not exhaust all the scriptures. I think I would have to condense that. Even so, I mean, well, like I said, part of it is I'd have to assume your familiarity, which I assume he did, and then it would be a little similar. But I feel like it's not entirely effective to assume familiarity if you want people to understand how these things pertain to Christ. So, though the job was done imperfectly, still, we got a sample of how one could easily do that. So verse 20, and they drew nigh unto the village, and they were headed towards Emmaus. This is on the road to Emmaus. You know, they'll say, Jesus is on the road to Emmaus, and that's what this is talking about. If you ever hear people refer to the road to Emmaus, Paul on the road to Damascus, and the disciples on the way to Emmaus. And they drew nigh unto the village whither they went, and he made as though he would have gone further. He's going to keep on going. But they constrained him, saying, Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent. And he went in to tarry with them. And it came to pass, as he sat at meat with them, he took bread, and blessed it, and brake, and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished out of their sight. And they said one to another, Did not our heart... I didn't realize I didn't scroll up a little there. Okay, let me shorten my own window. That's too much. There we go. And they said one to another, Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us by the way, and while he opened to us the scriptures? And they rose up the same hour and returned to Jerusalem, and found the 11 gathered together, and they were with them, saying, The Lord is risen indeed, and hath appeared to Simon. And they told what things were done in the way, and how he was known of them in the breaking of bread. Hold on before we go to the next part. So, I haven't found a lot here in the back of my mind. What did we say? So, on the road, he was talking with them. He gives them all this basically exposition about how Christ must suffer, and beginning at Moses and in all the prophets, he expounded to them the things concerning himself. And they drew, and I think it would be especially, like I said, with an eye to his coming in the first century, and not so much with an eye to the fulfillment of the rest of the prophecies concerning not the Son of Man, but the Lord from heaven. And they said the first man is of the earth, earthy. The second man is the Lord from heaven. I'm speaking of Adam and the Lord. But also, Christ in his coming, in his first coming, it is a very human coming, though he is the Lord from heaven. In his next coming, it is still the same Lord from heaven, but in a much different manner. And the prophecies are of a different character. He will speak peace to the heathen. He will, from sea to sea. It's interesting. One of the things Jesus said in the course of his ministry, he says, "Think that I am come to bring peace. No, I'm come to bring a sword." And what's interesting about that is that his first coming didn't bring peace the way the world thinks of peace. It brought peace to people as individuals in an inner sense, but in the sense that people were looking for peace, that the world should be at peace, that all things should be settled. He did not bring peace. He brought the sword. In fact, there's conflict from the time of Jesus' departure and even in the time of his life. His end was violent. People to this day will blame religion for violence when religion is often very involved. But men are impatient and wish to have dominion over one another. And very often, war of religion is as much a war about territory, whether it be the territory of men's minds and control of that territory as it is anything else. But it did not bring peace, not in the sense that we conventionally think of peace. But in his second coming, though he comes in war, he will bring peace. He will smite the heathen and bring peace. He will speak peace to the heathen. He brings peace by settling all the scores, because that's ultimately the only way you have peace. On a certain level, some things just need to be judged. So anyways, just a few final words on the different nature of the prophecies concerning Jesus in the Old Testament. And so they ask him to stay here with them in Emmaus. Obviously they had an impression. Well, they said their hearts burned within them. Their hearts probably did burn within them while he was speaking, but they probably just attributed it to the fact that, they had been upset and they didn't know him immediately. On the road, I should mention, because this was last Friday, you remember, they didn't know him, right? They become the parent from the country. They didn't know him. They didn't recognize him. They were so distracted by the things that were right in front of them. Haven't you heard the events that have been going on in Jerusalem? How, Jesus, who some of us thought was the Messiah, was taken and crucified. And Jesus begins to tell them, don't you know that this is how it should have been? And he tells them about it from the scriptures. And so this man, they've now think they're meeting for the first time. They're like, well, come, stay with us. It's getting dark. It's getting toward evening. Don't continue to travel. Come in and tarry. So he goes in. Jesus always accepts hospitality very often. I never recall him turning it down. I mean, whether he was invited to the home of a sinner or a Pharisee, and there's not a big difference between those two. There's a big difference between them, but they're both sinners in his eyes. So he when Jesus came to earth, he always dined with sinners. There was no escape from that. I think that was part of, they would say, this man eats with sinners. And from his perspective, he couldn't eat with anybody else. He'd be eating alone if he decided to eat without sinners. But that was something they couldn't really understand because they saw themselves as righteous. Many of them. And so he took bread, he blessed it and brake. That's similar. Even that formulation, I think, is the way it talks about in the Last Supper. He took bread, blessed it, and brake. And what it is something about the manner in which he breaks it. I've seen it portrayed in cartoons like it's almost like the moment is, you ever have deja vu, or something like that, where you feel like I've seen this before. And well, that was the moment when he blessed bread and brake it. They just felt like they'd seen that before, I think. And their eyes were opened in that instant. It could be a little bit of both. I mean, their eyes were holden, it said before. Their eyes were fixed on something else. But now they're inside and they're done traveling, and he has set their hearts on Christ. And now, as he sits before them and breaks the bread, suddenly for the first time they realize it's him. Anyways, and so they knew him, and then he immediately vanishes. They knew it was, and then poof, he's gone. This is what I said. If he wanted to, he could have gotten out of the crucifixion just by leaving. He always was able to kind of escape out of people's hands if he wanted to. But things that should not be done unless they're according to God's will. The Lord Jesus, if he modeled one thing in his life, was obedience to the will of God. And some people take a sort of fatalistic attitude about that, the will of God. They say, well, then why do anything? It's the will of God. And the will of God is not that you do nothing. Sometimes it's that you do nothing. Don't interfere with the situation. But a lot of times we don't know what the will of God is. So it's impossible to say that what we ought to do to be, to how we ought to react to circumstances. But once we know what God's will is, and that often is after the fact, after something happens, often we realize, well, that was God's will. In a sense, we need to often reconcile ourselves to bad things that happen that are God's will. And we ought to, in those circumstances, be reconciled to those facts. Because the things that happen in this world are God's will. As much as we might not like the things that happen. That's tough. It's really tough. Because, just look at when Jesus was crucified. He was praying and sweating, as it were, great drops of blood. His sweat was so profuse, it was like as though he was just bleeding. I don't think he was actually sweating blood, but maybe he was. Some people read it that way. I just read it as if it was just dropping blood. Because you can bleed a lot. If you're bleeding badly, you can bleed a lot more than sweat. Or otherwise, I don't know why it was, as it were, drops of blood. It doesn't say he was sweating blood. They could just say that. It wouldn't even be clear that wasn't a metaphor either, though, to tell you the truth. Anyways. He was sweating blood, but he was sweating he was sweating so profusely and so in such, as they say, an agony in the garden, knowing what God's will was and not particularly liking it. You don't have to. The things you suffer, you don't have to like. Jesus certainly didn't like them, but as it's written elsewhere, but for the joy that was set before him. For the faith and trust we have in God, we must endure things. They've been enduring the loss of their friend, the loss of the one they take to be the Messiah. It must have been a stunning, grievous blow. Here he is performing miracles one day, preaching, and they think, this is it, this is the Messiah, and then they kill him. And it was a shock. They did not expect that. But Jesus teaches them why they ought to have expected it. Sometimes we suffer things and we think we don't expect it. But in a sense, we ought to expect it. Because it is given us on the behalf of Christ not only to believe on him, but to suffer for his sake. As it's written in Philippians. Is it the last verse of chapter 1 or the last verse of chapter 2? The first verse of chapter 2. Somewhere in there. Maybe we'll do Philippians next, and then unless I already did that recently. I don't think I did. It's been a while. I was thinking about doing some shorter New Testament books here. So he was known to them in the breaking of bread. And then they returned to Jerusalem immediately, the same hour. They didn't even wait till the next day. It's evening, but they go back. So they probably return, and it's night. And they find the 11 gathered together, and then they were with him. Maybe it isn't night, but it's getting there because it's like it was some number of furlongs, which I'm not gonna look at that up because of the distance. It's a bit way off. It doesn't matter. Like them being there at day or night is not a critical aspect of this. And so they return to Jerusalem, and they find the 11 because Judas is gone. Judas that betrayed him. And they that were with them, meaning there's not just them, but there are others, saying, "The Lord is indeed risen, and hath appeared to Simon." I'm trying to remember. When they say Simon, my brain is on the first day of the week. Okay, the disciples, because they call it Peter. So is it one of them Cleopas? Whatever. I don't know if was Cleopas with Simon, or were they talking about Simon Peter? You know what I mean? So I don't know what I lost track of Simon. Where's Simon in this? Why is he coming up? Wait. Oh, no, wait. Okay. I think what it's saying is actually they returned to Jerusalem and found the 11 gathered together, and they that were with him, saying, and I think this is what the 11 are saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and hath appeared to Simon," meaning Simon Peter. Because there wasn't a Simon on the road to Emmaus. And then they speak, saying, "Jesus himself stood in the midst of them." Oh, wait. And they told what things were done in the way, and how he was known of them in the breaking of bread. So the Lord these are two events being described here. One is the apostles telling Cleopas and the other disciple, who isn't mentioned, Cleopas and the other disciple, what happened while they were gone, that the Lord had appeared unto Simon. And here, because I remember there isn't a case, I know that Jesus appears to Simon, and Luke doesn't record this. But, he records it here, and this is it. One verse, one sentence. But in the other Gospels, it is appeared that he appeared to Simon. So that's, just he gives a less detailed account. And then they told what things were done in the way, and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. They said, well, and then, we saw him, and then we didn't recognize him, but when he broke the bread, suddenly we knew him, and then he vanished. And as they thus spake, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them, and said unto them, "Peace be unto you." And they were terrified and affrighted, and supposed that they had seen a spirit. And he said unto them, "Why are you troubled? And why do thoughts arise in your hearts?" I have to laugh because I feel like, Jesus, because you just appeared in the middle of everybody. That's scary. That would scare anybody. I don't think it has to. I mean, they suppose they had seen a spirit. I don't know what I would suppose. But anybody just appears out of nowhere, I'm gonna jump like a cat. I mean, just every hair on my body is gonna be standing on end. I don't know. I think that's a little bit. I don't know. Why are you so frightened? Because that's shock. Like, it's shocking. Why? Well, maybe they thought, but they might have been like, maybe they had other thoughts. I mean, maybe they were terrified because after the first moment, I think the initial shock would definitely cause people to jump a bit. I'd jump. I would jump out of my skin. Somebody just appears in the middle of the room. I'm gonna jump out of my skin. But then, whoa. And then I think it's because they still were afraid. I've certainly jumped out of my skin. It's like I think my wife, everyone in my family has probably made me jump at least once. At least anyone who's big enough to be, something for me to jump at into into ready mode. When you like the confrontational thing, because you feel like you don't know what you're confronting. Someone just is in. You don't expect someone to be somewhere, and then you walk around a corner, and you don't expect anybody. Like if you really don't expect them, there's sometimes when it's like someone comes into a room. You were in a room and there's nobody there, and then that someone comes in and you don't notice. Then you go in there. Didn't expect to see anybody there. But then you see who it is. And it's like, oh, it's my wife. Oh, it's my brother. Oh, it's my son. That when you discover who it is, you usually, you scared me there for a second. But I think the problem is, not the problem, but what he's remarking on is it's not their initial start that they probably would have had if he just appeared in the midst of them, which is, of course, understandable, but their continued fear, because I think they continue to be afraid after the initial start. And that's why he would say, why are you troubled and why do thoughts arise in your hearts? Because he's not criticizing them probably for their initial jump, which would have been funny, I'm sure, from his perspective. But then they're like, whoa. As they recognize him, thoughts are rising in their heart. And what kind of thoughts? Well, they suppose that they had seen his spirit. They start thinking, like, what are we seeing here? They start questioning it. And it's natural because they still don't understand. Even though they said Christ indeed is risen, encountering him again and again is something, they haven't been expecting to encounter him. They were expecting a kingdom. They didn't expect to encounter the risen Lord. But, this whole section to me is that, to me it's one of the most important aspects of my faith is that the reason I believe more than, you can expound to me in the scriptures and that's comforting. And we can talk about other things, evidence and such. It's having encountered the Lord, the risen Lord. I haven't seen him, but I called on his name, and his spirit entered into me, and I felt power come into me in a very real way that was certainly convincing to me, and people can question it. I don't care. They certainly do. It doesn't really matter to me because the moment is what convinced me. I suppose people might think, do you think that makes you special? Well, being all of us who have faith, it makes us special because we are God's elect. We are God's chosen. In that sense, yes. But in the sense of does it make me better than other believers? Well, it doesn't make me better, for sure. As Jesus says, I think he might even say it here. No, it's not here because Thomas, Thomas isn't in Luke, but Thomas was doubting, right? And he wanted to put his hand in the wounds. And he says, you believe because you've seen and touched these things. You've seen, but blessed are those who believe without having seen. And when I was young, I thought I wanted to be that way. I want to believe without having to see anything. I haven't seen anything, but I've seen things in the sense of, I consider what I experienced to be, if not seeing, it is a metaphorical seeing. It's an experience. Having some sort of experience with the Lord is the equivalent of seeing, or it can be. It's the equivalent enough for me. And maybe it's not quite so much, but all it does, and for one, I think that over time, so many believers have encountered the Lord in one way or the other. I've had people tell me of their encounters. And what I understand most of all is it's not as meaningful to me as it is to them. But the reason I talk about it is so that if your faith is in at all doubt, seek the Lord, continue to seek him. I was seeking the Lord and looking for him to respond to me with the Spirit or something. I was looking for something from God, not just to know he was real. I mean, this was not a moment like, prove to me you're real, God, but I was seeking him that I might be, receive the Spirit, and that I might have the power to separate myself from the sins that were so troublesome to me. And that was why I was seeking God. That's why I was calling on his name, that I could receive his Spirit and that I would be strengthened by that. And that's what I got. I did. I was strengthened, and also from that, one of the side effects was that it increased my faith in general. It strengthened it immensely. And knowing that God responds. Sometimes I remember people joke like, it's okay to talk to God, but if God talks back, well, whoa. But it's like I think that's God can talk back in whatever way he wishes. In whatever way he wishes to communicate or reveal himself to people, he does. A lot of times, though, unless God gives you a message to give to other people, telling them about the way God did something for you is not. Don't expect people to be that excited about it. Just like Thomas, we all have our doubts, and it's not necessarily that we doubt the Lord, but people are going to doubt you. It's just natural. It's perfectly understandable. And the best thing to do is to be completely understanding of that. It's not, it's not your fault. It's just their experience has just taught them to expect things to be a certain way. It's like I prayed hundreds of times and God didn't respond. But I mean, that's the way it is when you're dealing with other people, or persons, individuals. When you have a relationship, you never called someone and didn't get a call back. You never sent someone a text and didn't get a text back. I mean, it's like, and sometimes some people don't communicate in a certain way. I remember people would send me texts, and for a long time, I didn't do texts. I didn't even check them. I didn't really understand how to check them. That's how, I kind of knew, but it's like I would sort of not notice texts coming in because I wasn't checking them. I would always check missed calls. I didn't really notice a little notification there with the text. And I was looking, because when you have unread text, it just has a notification there, What I'm saying is it's like a relationship is a complicated thing. Take time and forge your relationship with God. Make God feel that it's, like, why should here's the thing. I don't think I was special. Because I was praying for it for years and years before God responded to me. I would think I was special if the first time I asked, God just immediately responded. I'm so special. When I was 15, I asked, God, please talk to me. And he did. That would be a real special person. Who, without any kind of relationship with God, the God's like, yes, I definitely want you to know I'm here. It's just not. So, I guess I don't find that it made me feel special. It made me feel relieved. More, it made me feel relieved. Relieved to know that it really was there. It was a relief. That's why I'm not. I don't need it to convince people about me. That's fine. I don't care about me. You don't need to know nothing about me or believe anything about me. That's fine. Oh, okay. So why the thoughts arise in your hearts? It's a spirit. And by that they often mean ghost, some sort of ghostly apparition, not the man. They don't think it's just the Lord, the guy we were with the other day. Like, it bugs them, and so they begin to try to explain it. Instead of the simple explanation of, like, he's just here. They think it's something not, that they saw a spirit. Because what a spirit is often, to me, a little bit sketchy. It's sketched out, not perfectly delineated. It's more, we know more about spirit, about the way, by context than we do about, there's no prophet who sits down and says, this is what the spirit is, blah-blah-dee-boo. There's no exact, it's one of those things that nobody ever takes the time to exactly explain. But it's also one of those things we all kind of think we know. But this is one of the things I like. Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me, and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bones, as you see me have. They say, handle me. Touch me. A spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see me have. That's well, I said generally we don't get much definition about spirit. There's a clue, part of it. Spirits don't have bodies. They are acorporeal beings. Or that's what it said. That's what angels are. Acorporeal, not beings. I don't know that a spirit is a being necessarily. And that gets into the idea of spirit. One time I did a study on the oraclesofgod.org. It's all about Arnold Murray and the pre-incarnation myth. But that's the closest I get to having a study about spirit. And in that sense, it might be worth a listen. But spirits are not... The idea of when you're talking about spirit, you're talking about something disembodied. When God... And you can have beings that are spirit, but that gets a little confusing. But it said, God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living soul. The breath of life is the spirit. Now, it is not to say that the spirit is only the breath of life, but the breath of life is a form of spirit. It is alive, yet does not have a body, which is a strange thing, meaning it is life itself. But spirits take on shapes. I'm just telling you some things I've learned. Spirits take on shapes. I mean, the Spirit of God is himself a person and takes on forms, such as when he took on the form of a dove. It can take on form and appear. Though, I don't think that dove would have been something you could catch in a snare. It doesn't have, meaning, I don't think he descended in bodily shape like a dove, but it did not mean that he was a dove. You know what I mean? The Spirit shows mysteries. The Spirit does all kinds of things like the Spirit of God. But the Spirit of man, when Jesus died on the cross, Jesus gave up the ghost. Father, into your hands do I commend my spirit. But then as we read, his soul was not left in hell. There's this delineation between soul and spirit. The Word of God is sharp and powerful. It's powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, dividing in sunder even the soul and the spirit. Though I don't know that I think that what it means is that actually, when you divide the soul from the spirit, you have death. Because the soul arises from the spirit being connected to a body. At least that's what I think, as far as I can tell. At least that's what happened with Adam. When the spirit entered into a body, it became a living soul. And when the spirit departs, the soul, I personally, the soul, like I said, it's not something you can measure. It doesn't stay with the body per se, but it does, as the body is buried and kind of, the soul also is sort of dead. But to God, all things live, because in the resurrection, he sees all things as they shall be. That is why we talk about, like, I was dead, but I am now alive. Because we can be spiritually dead, which actually refers not so much to being... That's why this is such a confusing subject. You think about it. It's like, we're talking about being spiritually dead. Dead spiritually. Meaning, we're dead in some sense other than in a body sense. But it might be better to call it metaphorically dead. And sometimes spiritually dead means metaphorically dead. Sometimes when we say interpret things spiritually, we mean metaphorically, which is confusing. Because a metaphor is when you say something like, the moon is smiling down, or something. That's a metaphorical way to speak about the moon. And that's not really a great example, but anyways. But sometimes I'm confused when people talk about spirit, something means something spiritually, or when they mean it, when they're talking about the spirit. So I do think the word spirit, certainly in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, and in the Greek, gets a lot broader use than we might expect. It's used for many other things beyond. I mean, the Hebrew word spirit is also used for wind. So that's, it has a broader application than we know. So it has a broad application, but we use it for some very specific and important things. When we talk about the spirit in the sense that they're talking about, some sort of disembodied person, it doesn't have flesh and bones. And, that's what I say about, they're talking about people going to heaven, right? Like, meaning in a transitional state. Meaning, like this is the story of the afterlife, according to tradition. You die. This is kind of the Orthodox Christian view, not Orthodox with a capital O, with a small o. I don't know what the capital O Orthodox view is. So the traditional view is you die, and immediately you go to heaven, or you go to hell. Then you spend some undefined amount of time there until the end of the world. Then you go back to earth to get your body, and then you go to the judgment seat of Christ, and then you enter into heaven again, or the kingdom of God, or whatever. There's a sort of now you see the problem with that? It's just weird. It's like I just go to heaven, and then I go get my body, and then why do I go get my body? People will say, what's heaven like? And I often point out what I remember my grandmother brought this video over, and it was about heaven. It was like ABC News or NBC, and they're interviewing, I forgot his first name, Haggard, who was the president of the National Association of Evangelicals, and he's since disgraced because of seeing prostitutes and homosexual prostitutes. I think they would have forgiven him if it wasn't homosexual, which is maybe he shouldn't be president of the association, though. Definitely, I think certainly. It's probably been forgiven since then. I assume. His wife stuck with him, I think. So God bless her, forgiving heart. But I don't think it was done out of malice or anything like that. I'm not condemning him either, but it's just that's what it was. Well, and because I didn't care for what he said, I disliked him before that. See, before that happened, I already disliked him. When that happened, I felt sorry for him. Actually, I felt sorry for him because they cast him out. But then when he goes on the national news and starts talking about heaven as a place where you can eat all the pastries you want and never get fat, that was acceptable. You know what I mean? He can talk about heaven. You can go and eat all the pastries you want and never get fat. Be as glutton as you like. It's not a sin anymore. Isn't that exciting? And I didn't care for that. Because it's just so wrong-headed when you're talking about the kingdom of God, heaven, whatever. To start talking in terms of you can just eat up, because it's so carnal. But here's the thing: if you don't have your body, then you must be in some sort of spirit state, because the resurrection hasn't happened. So without resurrection, you just go up to heaven and you start eating pastries. With what body? With what body? Now, some people, like the place I came from, Arnold Murray, will say, well, that spirit, as soon as you leave your flesh body, you have another body immediately. And they would say the flesh body is actually not important and blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the thing, though. Jesus, according to Jesus, if you when your spirit leaves your body, the spirit is not a flesh and bone type of thing. He says flesh and bones. And they said, well, it's not a flesh body, it's a spiritual body, but it's some sort of body. When he says flesh and bones, I don't think he means, I could be wrong, right? Certainly. I don't think so, but I think what he's saying is like, because Arnold Murray would say that that his body was, here's the thing. The scriptures say that our body should be made like unto his glorious body. That his body, his glorified body, is the image of what our resurrection will be like. And often I remember the Bible Answer Man used to say there is a 1-to-1 correspondence between your physical body and your resurrected body. And I certainly don't agree with him on many things, but on that, and at the time I didn't agree with that. But I see the point now. Like, that's what Christian doctrine teaches. And how you get away from it. That the body that comes out of the ground is directly connected to the one that was in the ground. We give up the ghost, but we don't leave our body. There's something to be restored. It's the resurrection. And it, on some level that may seem, there's lots of holes you can poke in things. Everybody can poke holes in all kinds of things and point out things that was ridiculous. It's like, well, when God, raising the dead is kind of a ridiculous idea. It's always going to be fraught with difficulties based on our human experience. But it's certainly, when we're talking about God and miracles, it's like, obviously all these things can make sense, right? Spirit bodies coming out of this body, or the dead body rising again into a new body, right? All that can make sense in terms of miracles. But what I think doesn't make sense is this idea that, okay, we just kind of go to like we die and we just go to heaven. We just hang out there for a while, and then we go back and get our bodies, and then we enter into heaven a second time. I don't, or the converse where it's like, oh, we die, we go to hell, and then after being there for a while, we go back and we go to the white throne judgment, and then we get thrown back in hell, or hell, the hell we were in gets thrown into a new hell. It's like a renovated hell. It's better. Torture is much more, they come up with all kinds of new tortures in the new hell. The old one gets worn out. We got to replace it every once in a while, and et cetera, et cetera. Both those situations, like the logistics of that, just doesn't seem very logical to me. You know what I mean? Like, I can deal with the idea of, I see why Arnold Murray wanted to just ditch the flesh body. Like you die and the flesh body goes in the ground, you never see it again. You don't need it. He denied the resurrection of the body, essentially. Not of Jesus' body. Jesus' body did rise, he would very adamantly affirm. But I see why, for us, he wants to just get rid of that, because when you want to place the dead, people have this urgent need to keep the dead in our timeline. Meaning, like, someone who died yesterday needs to today be in heaven doing something. Like today, here. And Jesus himself said, today you will be with me in paradise. So what gives? Well, God just looks at time differently is the way I see it. So, and we talked about that. So I'm done with that. But a spirit have not flesh and bones. All right? When he had thus spoken, he showed them his hands and his feet. Look at my hands and my feet. They were pierced. They're the same as they were when I was alive. They were not just like normal. Though I don't, what's interesting, I don't know if it contributes to our mythology. Just the fact that was the way it was. A lot of times in movies and stuff and in stories, we make the dead appear as they did when they died. But Jesus shows it to them as proof that he is not a spirit. which is interesting, because in a sense, like it is weird. I mean, if you don't acknowledge that this is a little weird, then I don't know, you're not thinking. It's not weird in the sense of like, I think what it was is they expected a spirit to be, if he was a spirit, he'd be all healed, right? He'd be all healed in his hands. Look, there are no marks. I'm just a spirit. All right? I'm just a spirit, no marks, and I'm just glowy, right? No marks. And he shows them his wounds to prove that he was flesh and blood. But I think we would expect a spirit to still show off the wounds, but a resurrected person to be totally healed. I mean, because like in the resurrection, I don't think they're going to come out like zombies, right? Right? We don't. Nobody expects that. Or like I'm gonna like maybe I was dead 1,000 years and my body comes out. And it's just all like I'm dust man, my body is turned into dirt, so it's just like this dirt. I'm just all made out of dirt with worms coming in and out of it, but I'm still in some sort of body. We could sort of expect like, oh, well, the dirt's going to coalesce like Adam into a body, and then the man will come forth in a resurrected state, all healed. And you think of the valley of dry bones in Ezekiel, when the bones come together and the flesh comes back on. The flesh coming back on, you think why would it stop at the point at which, okay, here it stops and this is the moment of death? Makes you think of movies like, I remember from when I was a teenager, Beetlejuice, and all the dead people had, as they died, that's what they looked. So there was a woman with her throat cut and she still had her throat cut, and there was a guy who's, some of them were kind of weird because it's like his head was shrunken and he had a shrunken head. Which was weird because, he was obviously decapitated. That's how he died. But then they shrunk his head, so he ended up with a shrunk head. So something that happened after he died affected his ghost, which was weird. No point in pointing that out, but I'm just saying. But like, that's kind of like the way we think. And I think it's because of what happened with Jesus. I think that's entered into our mythology. So when we talk about ghosts and stuff, but what's weird is we've transferred it. Ghosts look like they did when they died. Their heads are cut off, that they look like they did in the moment of death. They got their head cut off, and their head is detachable, and the ghost has no head because that's how he died. But Jesus says, "I'm not a spirit. I have flesh and bones. Look here are my wounds." Which is weird. It's a bit weird because I do expect that in the resurrection, if I died getting my head cut off, I'm not gonna be like, look I can still take it off. Look I can still see I'm the same guy who had his head cut off. It's still detached. Though here's the thing, like if the two witnesses were killed by decapitation, are the heads gonna kind of go rolling over like? Like that scary story to tell in the dark. Was it scary stories to tell in the dark or no? What was it called? There's that book, that creepy book. Like Mitai Dodie Walker. The head comes down and the body comes down the chimney and it rolls, and all the pieces in the head rolls over to the body and it grabs its own head and sticks it on. I'm not trying to make fun, but I'm just trying to understand. I want to understand. And I want to point out at least the differences in what we expect. I don't know what to expect. But on some level, I would expect that he could appear healed or not. I don't think he has to appear with the wounds. But because he could just heal, like when the man, his ear was cut off, he healed it instantly. And why the resurrection, the healing of death would stop at just making him alive again and not go ahead and heal his hands and stuff, obviously was for their benefit. It's because they would believe more if they could see the wounds. They would believe more if they could touch the wounds. That's why. I understand why, but it is a bit confusing because I don't think it's absolute. In fact, I've often wondered about that. Like, does he still have the wounds? You know what I mean? When he appeared, in Revelation, I saw a lamb as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes. He beholds the lamb as it had been slain. They all wax old as a garment, but thou art the same. Does he still have the wounds? I think he kind of would want to wear them. I think I don't know. You know what I mean? Like that's just sort of like that's how he appears now, with the wounds, permanently. But I assume he could appear without the wounds also. You know what I mean? Like I don't think he has to have the wounds. You know what I mean? Like I think he could not have the wounds. Obviously, he could appear with or without them. But I think he often appears with the wounds so that we can see and know exactly who it is. I mean, because you see, if a man appears to you and says, "I am Jesus," he's going to have those wounds, probably, so you know. Because I don't think God's going to let someone else appear with the wounds like that. As far as not like, if a man wants to cut his hands up and stuff, yeah, I suppose. But I mean, like an angel from heaven isn't going to appear with the wounds of Christ. I don't think that would be allowed. Even the devil can't do that as far as I'm concerned. And while they, that's not to say that, I don't know. Could he do that? Well, I don't know. I guess it seems to me like something that like he shouldn't be allowed to do. It's like, no, not that. You're convincing enough without that. Because I don't think he needs that to convince people. I mean, Antichrist. And while they yet believed not for joy and wondered, he said unto them, have ye here any meat? So they couldn't believe it because they were so happy. They were so happy they couldn't believe it. They're so happy to see him alive again that they couldn't quite believe what was going on. Have you here any meat? But we see it like how central the doctrine of the resurrection is to Christianity. I mean, Jesus rose. He wears the wounds to show that he rose bodily. That's one of the things is like, if I was a spirit, do you think I'd have these wounds? Whatever his point was, it was to demonstrate that he had risen bodily. That the body that had been killed was raised. And that our bodies, when we are killed, also shall be raised again. That is one of the things that is central to Christianity. I remember in Catholic Church, when they would go through the creeds, I believe in this, I believe in that, I believe in the resurrection of the body. I used to even fault it because I followed Arnold Murray, and I thought, you're never going to need that body again. It's not a question of need. It's a question of what happens. Together with my dead body shall they arise. Isaiah 26. It is the teaching from the Old Testament to the time of Christ that the body will rise. Have you here any meat? Do you have anything to eat? Meat often is used as a figure of speech, say, for all kinds of food. You got bread? Any bread? Any meat? And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and of a honeycomb. And he took it and did eat before them. I think that was important for them. And that's why did Haggard talk about eating in heaven? Because the Lord Jesus demonstrated eating in the resurrected state. You know what I'm saying? But if you're in just a spirit state, without your body, why would you be eating? Spirits, if we go to heaven just as spirits, there is a body, spiritual body, and a celestial body and terrestrial bodies, as Paul taught in 1 Corinthians 15. But I don't think when he talks about spiritual body, he means so much just the spirit. A body something that is spiritual is not the same to say that it is a spirit. You know what I mean? It is a body of the spirit, is what spiritual means, meaning that the spirit has raised it, glorified it. You know what I mean? It is also called a glorified body. But the idea of it is born a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body, means it has, when we talk about raising, that which rises must first go down. You know what I mean? Why would it be a rising if it is just a stepping to the side? You know what I mean? Like, if there is just no up, down, or nothing. It's just basically a lateral movement. from, an unbroken stream of consciousness from one plane of existence to another. Like if a nuclear bomb went off, I'd still be sitting here and being like, what happened to all this stuff? He eats before them to demonstrate, yeah, I'm alive and I'm eating. And he said unto them, these are the words which I spake unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses, and in the prophets, and in the Psalms, concerning me. Then open he their understanding, that they might understand the Scriptures. You know what? Okay, you know what? I'm going to tell recording 54 straight. Oh, I got 5 minutes. And I've got not a lot of scripture, but thus it is written, and thus it behooved Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead the third day. See, so he eats, and then he says, these are the words which I spake to you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses, and in the prophets, and in the Psalms concerning me. And we've covered many of those things. Yesterday we covered from each of the books of Moses, scriptures, things written concerning Christ. Right? We covered several of the prophets. Isaiah. We jumped over to Jeremiah. And also, we did Jeremiah, didn't we? Yep. A little bit, but I thought that was more Second Advent focused. Malachi. And we've talked throughout the book of Luke about Zechariah 9:9. There are scriptures in other prophets also, which we have not covered. And some more or less. Some are very strongly connecting us to Christ. When I teach the Old Testament, if someone listen to my study on Isaiah or just the one I did in Hosea, I will connect everything to Christ because it's a Christian Bible study. I mean, as far as not necessarily to specific events in his life, but to the facts of his suffering and death. That there's so much that you can connect to that. I mean, just the whole sacrificial system. Because his suffering and death replaced that system for us. There's so much of the Old Testament that Christ replaces, and there is so much to be said in tying that all together. And a lot of the study of the New Testament is the study of those things. And you can go to the Old and then confirm it. A lot of times, Paul brings forth some verses from the Old Testament. A lot of times you don't know it because most Bibles don't mark it out. If you have a good study Bible, it's going to tell you, Paul is quoting from whatever in Isaiah or whatever in the Psalms. So we talked about the prophets. We didn't talk much about the Psalms, but we have throughout as we've gone through. We went through Psalm 22. I pointed out Psalm 69. We talked about, Psalm 108? No, the Lord said unto my Lord, right? The Lord said unto my Lord, what is it? I'm going to know what Psalm that was. I'll find it real quick. You can see kind of what I'm doing there. Lord said my Lord. Hopefully that's more than 250. What? Let's just go with just the Psalms. I guess that is. Let's throw in a sit. Sit. There we go. 1. Okay, maybe that's. Yeah, there we go. That's funny because I'll show you. I mean, you don't see this. Let's see. There we go. Results 1. That's what I was talking about. But it's Psalm 110. I was close with Psalm 108, I suppose. I'm not going to look and see what's in Psalm 108, what I was thinking. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand till I make thy enemies thy footstool. Right? if, you know, there's a lot here. Anyways, so like singing there's Psalm 110, Psalm 22, Psalm 69. Oops. There are definitely other things in the Psalms. I'm thinking about extending this study one more day to do, I got some positive feedback from the other day. And I'm thinking maybe we will do the final study in Luke, going through even more scriptures that we didn't cover concerning Christ in the Old Testament, since now it is emphasized a second time. All things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses and in the prophets and in the Psalms concerning me. Then opened he their understanding that they might understand the scriptures. That's an important thing. When I received the Spirit, my understanding was opened, and my eyes were enlightened. This happened, they haven't even received the Holy Spirit like they will in Acts, and they're understanding more already. And said unto them, thus it is written, and thus it behooved Christ. It was appropriate to suffer and to rise from the dead the third day. I said I was going to do it, but then I'm thinking like, okay, wait. That may end up... boy. All right. What I'm going to do, I think, is... I want to cover what he says here also, right? And I want to cover more scriptures. Well, here's what I'll do. I want to cover this first, and then we'll probably if there, depending on how much time is left at the end of the study, we will go into some of the other scriptures we didn't cover as a way to fill out tomorrow's study, because we're going to come short, I think, on time. Though God knows the subjects he refers to here, repentance and remission of sins, should be preached in his name among all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And thus it behooved Christ to rise from the dead the third day, that repentance... All right, so... witnesses of things from... Yeah. We're going to begin with verse 46 tomorrow, because we haven't really dove into that. And we'll talk about it, and then we will also bring forward some additional scriptures about it. And I will make sure I have them adequately vetted before we do it, so it'll maybe be a little better than last time. We're not going to go over the same ones we went over before. We'll bring into the picture different ones. So, thanks for joining this study. We will complete the Gospel of Luke tomorrow. Until then,
the Lord sent a word unto Jacob, and it hath lighted on Israel, and all the people shall know, even Ephraim and the inhabitant of Samaria, that say in the pride and stoutness of heart, the bricks are fallen down, but we will build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will change them to cedars. Therefore the Lord shall set up the adversaries of Rezin against him, and join his enemies together, the Syrians before and the Philistines behind. They shall devour Israel with the